Welcome to the 902 podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vik, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska. That's @LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So to get us started today, we've got two co-hosts in the room. Appreciate you guys being here, but nobody better to start with than Sheriff Terry Wagner, Chief Deputy Ben Houchin. Appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This is your show. So
okay.
This is how we get it kicked off. We're calling this episode 0. Some people say to start with 0. Hopefully, we're going to try and give an intro to some of our listeners that are out there and people that are subscribing to our podcast, but wanted to give them a little bit of a sense of who we are here at LSO and figured there was nobody better to start with than you two. So I wanted to ask, what would you say drew you to LSO? How did you get here? How did you become who you are today when it becomes the sheriff's office?
Well, you've got to remember that when my decision was made, it was 1976. So I had just, in 1972, I turned 18. I was expecting to get drafted and probably sent to Vietnam. And in 1973, that ended. So then I was what do I do now? So I spent the next 3 years kind of figuring out what I want to do with my life, and I decided I wanted to see if law enforcement was a good fit for me. So I went to the Nebraska State Patrol, and at that time, they wouldn't hire anybody under 5'10". And I'm about 5'8.5", so they wouldn't even give me an application to be a state trooper. Lincoln Police walked the beat for 2 years at that time before he got into a patrol car, and I didn't want to walk a beat for 2 years. And the gas station I worked at was open 24 hours a day. A lot of sheriff's deputies came in there for gas because they bought gas on the economy back then, and the sheriff came in on a regular basis. And so I applied at the sheriff's office. Sheriff came in one day, and back then I was riding a Harley Davidson, had longer hair, and he said, "I didn't know you were interested in law enforcement." And I said, "Well, I am." He said, "Well, we don't have any openings right now." And I said, "I know, I got the letter." And he said, "But we need a dispatcher, and if you'll agree to dispatch, I'll make sure that the next commission becomes available. You'll get it." So I started in June of 1976 as a dispatcher, and then in late August of that year, one of the deputies resigned, and I got that commission. So that's how I came to be with LSO back then. Went to the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center out in Grand Island in 1976, graduated from there, worked my career here at LSO, and became an accident reconstruction specialist. That became my area of interest and expertise, and I was also on our tactical response unit and became the team leader for that unit during that time. And then in 1994, tumultuous year here at LSO, Sheriff Cassidy was selected to become the chief of police for the city of Lincoln, and the county board appointed a replacement who was sworn in on a Tuesday and resigned on a Wednesday. And then it was sort of like up in the arms on who were they going to appoint to be sheriff. So they appointed retired District Court Judge Samuel Van Pelt, with the understanding that he couldn't serve very long past the election because he wasn't a certified law enforcement officer. It's really a very wise move on the board's part. So I decided I would run for sheriff that year, and I was unopposed in the primary, and I won the general election by about 611 votes.
Tight,
very tight.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I was unopposed for the next 6 terms. And my 8th term here, I've obviously had an opponent last year and prevailed there. So I'm into my 8th term of office.
So with your 8th term in office, are you now the longest serving sheriff in Lancaster County?
I am. Merle Carnop served 7 years as sheriff. 7 terms, 28 years. and I have exceeded that now after being sworn in again for this 8th term, November 5th.
Okay. You started earlier than most because you.
I did. Yeah, actually, I could have stopped at end of 7 terms because when Sam Van Pelt was sheriff and he couldn't serve past a given time period because he wasn't a certified law enforcement officer, the county board swore me in early to fulfill that term of office. So I was the 4th sheriff that we had in 1994.
Wow.
So I was sworn in late November, served November, December, and then sworn again to the term with which I was elected early that first week in January. So I had that 6 weeks time span there where I had already exceeded Carnup's length of service.
Okay. Ben.
Mine's not as exciting as that. I graduated from Wesleyan in 1991. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. So I started working at the pen. And I worked there 13 months. At that time, I saw an application for this. And I don't have anybody in law enforcement in my family whatsoever. And so I saw that. I go, God, that may be kind of fun to go do for 4 or 5 years so what I can figure out what I really want to do with my life. And so I applied. God, back then, I think we had like 800 people who were trying to get hired at that time. And I was lucky enough of the 5 to be one of the 5 to get hired. And that's how I ended up starting my career here. And so I started that in June 6th of 1993. So I'm coming up to my 30th year being here come June. And it's been an unbelievable ride. I've worked narcotics. I worked undercover. Worked a ton in criminal at that time. Became early on, probably 3.5 years into my career, I got onto the TRU team. And I was lucky enough, I became the assistant team leader through my years, team leader and commander of that unit during my tenure here. So that's been exciting on that. Also became a polygraph examiner, did a lot with crime scene tech and things of that nature. And it's been a heck of a good ride at this point in time. I got promoted to sergeant in 2000, and I worked criminal as a criminal sergeant. And then in 2005, I got promoted to a captain and went through that, worked the courts division, patrol, and 2 terms through criminal at 5 years. And in October 2020, I became the chief deputy and serving there at this point in time.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for letting our listeners know a little bit about you. Appreciate that. One of the big questions that we hear when we go out and do talks in public, you guys give presentations and things like that a lot of times, but it seems like a simple question, but it's probably a longer answer. What is a sheriff? What do you tell people when?
That's exactly right. I'll just throw that question out to groups when I speak to them. What do sheriffs do? And have them kind of cock their head and think, well, I don't know, what do sheriffs do? And they'll talk about our general patrol duties, traffic enforcement, acts investigation, initial investigation of calls for service, but they tend to forget about those duties that have been given to sheriffs by the legislature, and that's civil process, court security, prisoner transportation, sex offender registration, handgun permits, title inspections. So those are all tasks that the legislature enacted that were given to sheriffs to perform. So we have clearly about 1/2 of the sheriff's office personnel are dedicated to those tasks that are only done by sheriffs. Nobody else does them in this state. So when you look at our law enforcement function, criminal investigations, and our deputies on patrol, that's a little over half of our workforce. The rest of the employees are dedicated to those tasks that I mentioned.
So you see sheriffs on Western movies and things like that. I mean, is that where it started, or where does the word sheriff even come from?
Well, the sheriffs started in medieval England. around 900 AD. And if you remember back to the Robin Hood days, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Nottinghamshire, by the way, is what's he known for? Well, he's known for collecting taxes and being kind of corrupt. And it's interesting that we still collect taxes today on people who don't pay their taxes. But back in the day, all of the counties in England are called shires. So Nottinghamshire, we just mentioned that, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and then each shire had a reeve, or that was a guardian for the shire. And that word, reeve, the shire reeve, became contracted and into the word sheriff. Sheriffs were the first elected officials in America in about 1610 in Virginia. And, the tasks of local government were really put upon them, serving summonses, running houses of correction, handling most of the government operations then of counties. And then, of course, as you move into the 17 and 1800s, sheriffs were the law enforcement officers for those geographical areas in their states, they're in their counties. And a lot of Western shows have been made about sheriffs. Some flattering, some not. But, one of the questions I always ask people, name two famous sheriffs in history, real or imaginary. And people will throw out Matt Dillon. Well, he was a U.S. Marshal, and we talk about that a little bit. Andy Griffith was a good example of a sheriff in the town of Mayberry in North Carolina. Those reruns are still on today, and they're a great example of pure community policing and really the way we wish policing could be handled today. But and the Sheriff of Nottingham was the other imaginary sheriff that you think of. But looking back on famous sheriffs in this county, first sheriff was Lois Luder in 1861. So we've been around just about 163 years now, 62 years. But probably the most famous sheriff in Lancaster County's history was Merle Carnop. He was elected sheriff in 1950 and served, 28 years until 1979. But he was sheriff during the Charles Starkweather murder spree in 1957 and 58. He was also president of the National Sheriff's Association, which is the only Nebraska sheriff to have attained that honor. And Sheriff Carnop was an interesting guy. He was a transitional sheriff as far as our office is concerned. Evolved into a night patrol, a standard kind of a police force, if you would. And so it was an interesting time between 50 and 79. I got hired by Sheriff Carnop in 76. And he was quite a guy. I really appreciated knowing him.
So, Ben, for the people that are listening that don't know what the modern Lancaster County Sheriff's Office is like, how would you lay out our divisions for them and our duties now?
Wow, I was just sitting here thinking with Sheriff Wagner's talking about how Sheriff Carnop changed it. But, I've been here since 1993, and how the Sheriff's Office has changed from then till now is just unbelievable. And the progression that this agency has done throughout the years, and it speaks highly of Sheriff Wagner on that part. I do want to give that plug on that. First, we'll start with the criminal division. They have general investigators, and then VAWA, and our EEU unit is one of the best, I think, in the Midwest, if not all into the nation. And they do a heck of a job on, with the evidence with cell phones at this day and age, and how important that is, and us being able to get into phones to obtain the evidence we need to make convictions is unbelievable. And we have a lot of outside agencies who are using our abilities on that to send us the phones and do that. And then we have our Marshal Task Force, which I think helps extremely, wouldn't you say, Sheriff, on keeping the crime down in Lincoln, Lancaster?
Yeah, the U.S. Marshals Task Force is really they're out there arresting bad guys the minute those warrants get issued, and I think that really has helped keep violent crime down in Lincoln, Lancaster County.
Yeah. And then, you move to our criminal interdiction unit that's up on the interstate. And, not only are they arresting people for narcotics, but, there's human trafficking that they're ending up dealing with and doing a lot of things like that. They've caught thousands of Cadillac converters that were being transported and being used that way. They've assisted in catching the homicide suspects and doing all those works up there. So they're doing a great job. Then there's our patrol, and I think that's what people would probably identify law enforcement the most, is those are the units that are out there running the traffic, working the acts, and taking the calls for service and doing those kind of things. And then we have our courts division. And I don't think as many people know them and what they're doing, but they're doing a lot of prisoner transport in-state, out-of-state, and picking up fugitives doing that. They're the ones that do our title inspections out at 46th and R. Those are the ones you see if you have a car and you purchase it out-of-state. And then the courtroom security as they come through. I mean, a lot of people who come into the Hall of Justice get to meet our front security guards as they go through the metal detectors and the scanners and things of that. So that is that group. And then we have the professional standards, which is our brand new one that you know very well. John, you're the captain of that division. And I tell you, I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of chat about that since you're the expert on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the reason that we're doing this podcast and why we're here today is we're trying to be responsive to some of the demands of our community, and we've definitely heard some of the demands from our community that they want us to be more open, and maybe transparency is the word that you hear sometimes, but I think that means different things to different people. But certainly what we want to be able to do is number one, be able to engage the community, talk to the community, and build trust with the community. And a couple different ways that we do that. Number one, we talk with them through a number of different methods, like this being one of them, a podcast. We've definitely ramped up our social media presence, things like that. But the other is that we just have to keep our accountability in line too, and people have to know that we're doing things the right way for the right reasons. And so our professional standards division oversees all of our hiring, all of our training, and also sometimes our disciplinary investigations too, when people aren't doing things the right way. And so that's really the need that gave way to the professional standards division. So it's the smallest division we have right now, but definitely no 2 days are ever the same. So we stay plenty busy. So
you mentioned the IA portion of it. The one thing I think I'm really extremely proud of is the number of complaints that we do get in here is extremely low, and most of the investigations that I believe IA gets in are internal investigations that we find ourselves. They're not called in. So
yep.
I feel lucky that most of our people are out there doing the right things, and that we're finding the problems and dealing with it before it becomes a problem on the outside. And I think that's huge, because I think one year we've only had 2, and we got 114 employees. That says a lot about what's going on, especially in what we do for our profession.
Yeah.
And then we have the next and last division is Special Services, who does our records and our civil process on those. They're serving the civil papers, going out there and doing that part of it. Again, they do the taxes and collect those. Also, they're the ones at the front that answers the phones, do the reports, files all those, do all the sex offender registrations, handguns, and all those kind of things. They're very busy up there all the time, and that's another, besides the patrol division, they're the other 24-hour operation that has to be up and going all the time and doing that stuff. And then with that, we have our specialty groups, our tactical response units, our a drone unit that we use a ton, that's becoming more and more helpful, especially on crashes and crime scenes, and even using them in tactical situations. Then we have our crash team, as I mentioned, that go out there, and luckily this year we haven't had the last couple of years we haven't had to use them as much, but they are extremely well trained. We have our honor guard that is used probably as much as any specialty group. Then we have our field force that's works a lot with the Lincoln Police Department and does that. Then our crime scene techs, and you always hate to have them used because something bad, but I tell you, if something bad happens to your family, you want this group to come out because they're going to find and do what needs to be done. And then we have our officer-involved shooting team that works hand-in-hand with the Lincoln Police Department. So if one of our agencies are involved in a shooting and the sheriff or the chief of police decides that they want that group to come out and investigate, which they mostly do, that they're out there and they got the expertise on how to go through that. And also the important thing is to be transparent. And we want to make sure that the public can trust what's going on. And the best thing to do is have another agency investigate what transpired.
Well, we're really looking forward to hopefully being able to use this platform as a way to meet some of those people and hear some of those stories behind what's going on at LSO. So we'll definitely be looking forward to having them on future episodes. Sheriff, before we get into a little bit more of kind of how this podcast is going to look down the road, help our listeners understand what our jurisdiction is. Maybe what's the difference? You talked a little bit about the difference between police officers and sheriffs, but where does our jurisdiction start and stop?
Well, you look at it a couple of different ways. What's our statutory jurisdiction or statutory authority, and then our physical jurisdiction. So Lancaster County is 24 miles wide, 36 miles deep, north and south, so 864 square miles about. And there are 23 towns, villages, and cities in Lancaster County, and only one of them has its own police department, which is Lincoln. So we are the law enforcement provider for the other 22 towns and villages in the county, in addition to 7 state recreation areas that we share concurrent jurisdiction with the Game and Parks Commission, Interstate 80, U.S. Highway 77, U.S. Highway 34, U.S. Highway 6. We share concurrent jurisdiction with Nebraska State Patrol on those highways. And then we've got our state highways, Highway 2, Highway 43, Highway 79. So we share that jurisdiction with a number of different agencies at any given time. We work closely with the University of Nebraska Police Department as well. So that's kind of where our jurisdiction is.
Awesome. So we've talked about where sheriffs come from, what different duties and divisions we have here, things like that, but really it all boils down to our mission statement. And I know both of you have worked a lot on our mission statement over the last few years, really. But our mission statement at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office now is to provide exceptional law enforcement services that reduce crime, enhance public safety, and build public trust. So ultimately, day in, day out, that's what we want the 115 employees here at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office to be doing. And I think getting back to why we're doing a podcast, that last part of building public trust, we want to be able to, I think, let people see a little bit behind the curtain as to who is doing this work and what work are we doing for the citizens in Lancaster County. And hopefully this will be just yet another platform that allows us to do that. I had the honor to represent LSO in Quantico, Virginia at the FBI National Academy. It's a program both of you are graduates of as well, so thank you for sending me. But, one of the things that I was exposed to out there was the concept of using some of these different modes of communications and different strategies to be able to build that public trust. It was something that came up in the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And some of the things that came out of that was some pillars dealing with building trust and legitimacy within communities, and then also leveraging technology and social media. So that's really one of our goals that we've talked about, and it's one of our goals that's in our strategic plan of developing and maintaining effective external communications. Hopefully this is just one of many ways that we can continue doing that, but I really appreciate both of your support for being able to do this, and just yet another way to reach out to the community. But any thoughts on what your feelings are of building that public trust, and maybe some things that you wish people knew about LSO?
Well, I'm going to tell you, one of the biggest things is our values, and we have those on our branding on our steps. And the first one that's there that I think is probably one of the biggest one is treat everyone with fairness, dignity, and respect. And that's one thing I think that's the sheriff's office here in Lancaster does greatly, because if you're not getting very many complaints, people are out there doing it well. One of the things I love is getting those phone calls, getting those emails from individuals who are just so relieved and thankful that our people were there and helped them through those. We do the coroner reports all the time, and it's a very trying part for a lot of the families who are experiencing a death of a loved one, and our people have to go in there and do a job. And I am so impressed how our deputies do that, and the compassion they show to these individuals, and explaining it, why we're there and what we're doing. And I know the sheriff and I get tons of calls and emails all the time about our people and how thankful they were. And I love that part of it. And I think that's a huge thing. And I'm just, we've been doing community policing for so long. I think we even started before that name came along. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so important on that, this job, sometimes we have to go do things we don't like to do, but the big thing is that the culture here is professional, kind, and treating everybody with dignity and respect, and it's really shown here, and I think it's been this way for a long time.
If you treat people fairly, they will accept things that they feel are fair to them. So even if they're being arrested for a crime, if they feel that's been done fairly and respectfully, they're much more willing to comply with our requests. And I've had people call me or send me a letter that said, I was arrested for drunk driving by Deputy so-and-so, and I appreciate what they did for me. It was a turning point in my life. I know now I had a drinking problem, and I'm going to quit drinking. Things like that are really immeasurable. And so treating people fairly and with dignity and respect is just huge. I tell every deputy, if you're going to make a traffic stop, how would you want your mother or your sister or your wife to be treated by another law enforcement officer, and treat people accordingly?
Well, we've had these conversations a lot, and Ben hit on it too, and you did as well, Sheriff, of things that we feel that we've always done at LSO, but hopefully this is just yet another way that we can maybe reach out to people and tell them some of the stories and hear from some of the people that do that type of stuff day in and day out. And I certainly hope that's the case. I alluded to the FBI NA a little bit. I graduated session 284. Any thoughts from your experience? We could probably do a whole episode just on the NA experience.
Well, just for the listeners' edification, the FBI has a national leadership training program for local law enforcement in Quantico, Virginia, right with their Academy for New Agents. And so 0.1% of law enforcement officers get invited to attend the National Academy. So I've attended, Chief Deputy Houchin has, Captain Trotter, Captain Whitty, and now Captain Vik have all attended the training as well. And over the years, we've had a number of senior management personnel attend the National Academy. It is one of the best professional experiences that I ever had. The contacts that I made even 25 years ago when I attended are still useful today.
Yeah, I went back, it was in April of 2007 when I went, 229, and like you said, the contacts. My roommate, who is now second in charge of the Georgia State Patrol, and just being able to call up people that you knew from the course and get some ideas and do all that is great. Now, one of the problems I have now is a lot of them that I went to school with or Quantico with are retired.
They're retired, yeah,
yep,
exactly.
And the contacts aren't there. But the great thing is with the Nebraska Association, the FBI-NA, and the national one that we're so lucky enough to be able to be a part of, you get to go to those trainings and make new contacts and keep it up on that part of it, because there's nothing, why reinvent the wheel if you can call somebody and go, hey, how do you guys do this?
Well, like if you have something in New York City, if you call their main information number, where do you think that's going to get you?
Yeah.
And so if you have someone you can call directly and say, you may not be able to help me, but can you point me in the right direction?
Right.
That's worth a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the networking is a big piece of the curriculum out there, and it's very intentional that they do that just for reasons like that. But I took a class. I've listened to podcasts. I knew podcasts were a thing. I hadn't completely given it thought in a law enforcement context until there's college classes out there, and Cynthia Lewis, Mari Shine were instructors out there for me, and exposed me to this idea in one of my communications classes. And so we're looking forward to trying it out here at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. So I think the goal, what we're trying to do, again, just give our listeners an inside look at LSO, hopefully tell some of those stories, talk about some of the updates, cases maybe, and just things that don't lend themselves to 30-second sound bites that we want people to know about the good things that are going on here at LSO. But our hope is to maybe release monthly episodes. I think we're planning on having some guests on to talk about various public safety topics, things like that. And we hope to roll these out throughout the rest of 2023 and beyond. But we titled it the 902 podcast, Sheriff, and 902 goes back a little ways. Where does that come from?
Well, it does. In the 1950s, a statewide radio system for law enforcement was put into place. The State Patrol was sort of the keeper of that system, and so every trooper from number 1 to number 500 was their radio call sign. 600 would have been at that time state liquor inspectors. 700 numbers were reserved for game and parks officers. 800 numbers were reserved for some other entity, and then 900 numbers were reserved for sheriffs. And so each sheriff in each county, their radio call sign would be 9, followed by the number of their county. So in Lancaster County, we're county number 2, so we're 902. And then the deputies are numbered consecutively after that. So Chief Deputy Houchin is 9021. And, we're up to 902214 now. But so the sheriff out in Scotts Bluff would be 921. The sheriff in Cherry County would be, 973, I believe, or 975?
Sounds right.
Brown County, 75, I guess. So that's sort of, in back in the day, if I had been traveling or if a sheriff was traveling into the state penitentiary with a prisoner, and they called Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, if it was 9215, we may not know who that person is, but we know he's a deputy sheriff from Scottsbluff County with a prisoner. Mm-hmm. And then we could help them out however that took place. So it was a great method of communicating. That's how that numbering system came about.
Well, we're kind of leveraging that a little bit with the title of our podcast. Again, all things Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. So Sheriff Wagner, Chief Deputy Houchin, really appreciate you being here today and joining us for episode 0 of the 902 podcast. I'm Captain John Vik. We want to just thank everybody for listening today. Again, we want this podcast to give you an inside look at topics and public safety issues within Lancaster County, coming to you straight from the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. Be sure to subscribe for new episodes, and just remember, you can also follow us across social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska. That's @LSO Nebraska, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.